Welcome to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered with Perry Clark. This program looks at mental health from unique perspectives and shows you how to manage your life by finding the knots that help you and stay away from the ones that could be a disadvantage. Now, here is your host, Perry Clark.
Hello all, welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist here with you, and we're going to have another one of our blurred outs, or I'm not, maybe start calling this TheraBlerding Out, as I've got back here with me returning favorite, Mercedes Samudio. But before we even get into what we're going to be TheraBlerding out on, I want to remind everyone that this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only, and it does not constitute working with mental health providers. Please seek out one in your area to work on your unique issues. So, as I said, I'm going to give you a slightly abbreviated intro for Mercedes because we got a bunch of stuff to talk about. Mercedes is a licensed clinical social worker and a best-selling author, international speaker, and visionary entrepreneur. She runs a particular program called Shame-Proof Parenting and Parenting Philosophies to reduce the shame parents experience as they raise healthy children. She's also trauma-informed in multiple modalities, including brain spotting, which is part of how we met. And outside of that, she spends time in Southern California working on her own book and her training program. And I know she's also been getting a doctorate program, if I remember correctly, with her three furry babies, which is 2 cats and dog, and her lovely partner. And you can find more of her work at Shame-Proof Parenting. So, hello, Mercedes.
Hey, Perry. Thank you. I love talking here with you. It's so fun.
Well, it's also a delightful chance to be able to talk about some of these things. And like I said, blurting out or TheraBlerding Out.
I think you should trademark that. Like, that's actually a pretty cool idea.
I'll start looking into that in copious amounts of other time. But yeah, we'll look at that. And who knows, that may be a future spinoff if you're ever interested in hosting a podcast. But we're here today to talk about probably one of those little snoozer sleepers that didn't get the same big blockbuster as our last 2 sessions, which were Wakanda Forever and Across the Spider-Verse. And we're talking about something that those of you who have gotten Netflix, we're here to talk about They Cloned Tyrone.
Yes, exactly. That movie was crazy. It was good, though. It was like so good. It's exactly like what I was looking for as a kid. And so I'm excited to dive into this for sure.
Please start us.
Okay. So what my initial take on it when I watched it was that this was exactly the type of like genre stuff that I just love, that I got when I was a kid, and like Batman, the animated series, and Hercules, and like even some of the horror stuff, and like Buffy, right? But it was never an all-Black cast, number one. It was never in a space like my neighborhood or around people that I understood, right? I always had to understand other people's narratives and other people's perspectives, and I always could. But with that secret hope that like one day we could do that exact same type of sci-fi, horror, genre kind of bending narrative, but with my identity at the forefront of it. And so seeing this movie was that.
Yeah, and adding in also the aspect that they put in comedy too, because you got a couple of comedy actors known in here. Because as I was just looking at the cast list, I didn't even realize David Alan Grier was in there too.
As the pastor.
And yeah, after I looked at the pictures, like, okay, where was he in the set? Oh, he was that character because he had more hair between what's in the picture and such. But that aspect of that blend of those aspects, which I know sometimes I think the only other times I see stuff like that is in like anime.
Exactly. And it's usually not with Black or African-American characters at the forefront. Like if we're there, we're usually in the background, or we're like side characters, or we're very disposable characters. And I love that that's kind of even highlighted in, John Boyega's character, where it's like he's disposable, but
Hmm.
like, he's still there and he's still like really like aware of what's happening to him.
And especially, well, we don't want to give too much away if you haven't watched it, but yeah, there's a certain aspect of in the name, cloning is involved. Multiple clones are involved.
Yeah.
And I think it also hits on that narrative that even at this level, you don't have to be, the high socioeconomic Black character to be able to have access to this.
Yes. Yes. And I love that aspect that I feel like Black Panther really opened the door to this
Hmm.
idea that Black people are not this monolithic stereotype. And I love that I'm having this conversation with you because just by chance, I actually watched Black Panther this morning because that's just what I do. I wake up and I'm like, what Marvel movie will I put on today? And I put that on, and then I got my alert around like 10:30 that this was happening. I was like, that's so funny to me that I just decided this morning to watch Black Panther, and here we are talking about another, sci-fi genre movie with an all-Black cast. Right? We're
Hmm.
talking about the variety
Hmm.
that we have in our culture that we're not all one way. We don't look all one way. We don't all have the same interest, right? And so I think they clone Tyrone allows for that, where it's like even in this idea that there are clones and tropes and stereotypes, where's the
Hmm.
depth? What do we each look like? Like, what does this really look like? And so in a way, I feel like Black Panther really kind of busted the door open to us being able to really see how important it is to have narratives like this.
Hmm. Oh yeah. And with those various characters, even what the characters are and archetypes they're all playing. So from John Boyega's character, who is, yeah, is one of the people getting cloned, but he's also the narrative, the archetype of the drug dealer.
Yes. Yes.
And then we have Jamie Foxx, who's playing again the archetype of the pimp.
Right.
And
Right.
then we have, and I hate to, I don't want to screw up her name, but Parrish, T. Parrish,
Yes.
is playing Yo-Yo, the hooker or
Yes.
prostitute, depending on
Yes.
what, or so in this age, the sex worker.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's an interesting thing that I actually noted in someone else's post. A lot of chatter on the internet about this in Black Twitter and like this the Black internet
Hmm.
kind of space. But how if you pay attention to all of the sex workers, they're all fully dressed,
Hmm.
all of them. None of them are have any skin showing, or if they do, it's kind of part of just their outfit, but they're
Hmm.
all fully dressed. The only thing that is kind of signaling their profession or their archetype is that everything is very flamboyant. They're on the
Hmm.
street, right? They seem to be walking up and down the street at different points of the time. They have they kind of are the ears and the eyes
Hmm.
and the mouth of the neighborhood. And so all of these archetypes they get to play while being dressed in a way that completely demystifies what it looks like to be that character. And that was
Hmm.
something I picked up immediately because I grew up in that neighborhood. I know what that archetype looks like and how they normally are dressed by the department, the fashion department. I know how they normally
Hmm.
are portrayed. And so to see all of them, not just, if I want to say it's Tiana,
Yeah.
Parrish, Paris, but you're right, T. Parrish, right?
Yeah.
Um, we see that every single one of these women is a sex worker, is doing kind of this commentary on their archetype, but they're all fully
Hmm.
dressed. And so it completely like gets you to think, what and how do I then know that this person is playing this archetype? What stereotypes am I relying on to know that this person is playing this archetype? And in that, you have to then pay attention to what we just said. John Boyega is playing this character. Jamie Foxx is playing this character, right? T. Parrish is playing this character. And you just get to this point where you're like, well, how do I know that? What
Hmm.
stereotypes am I relying on? What archetypes am I relying on? That is what I'm loving about this movie. Like people are going to start having discussions about that. Well, how do you know he's the pimp? How do you know she's the sex worker? How do you know he's the drug dealer?
Hmm. And the fact that these are actually the heroes of the story.
Yeah, right.
And
Like
this,
they
yeah.
stumble upon everything, right?
Especially because
Because
Yeah, well,
Go ahead.
especially because if we were doing any other narrative, then it's like, oh, it's not these people that are supposed to be the heroes in the story. It's supposed to be, the good churchgoer, or the one who's, down and out trying to take care of their family and do all the right things, the sort of virtue signaling.
Yeah, that's a great observation too, right? That who do we normally want to see as the hero, right? Because then we're looking at what is the archetype, right? What is
Mm-hmm.
a hero? How do we know what a hero is? If I can just parallel, because again, I just
Mm-hmm.
watched Black Panther, how do we know he's the hero? Well, for me, it's this one moment where in the ancestral plane, after he realizes who Killmonger is and how Killmonger has access to Wakanda, he's in the
Mm-hmm.
ancestral plane really blaming, not blaming, but really saying, hey, you all messed up by leaving him. We created someone who could really destroy what we've created. I have to go back. I cannot die. I cannot just rest here while this person continues to show up in Wakanda, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's his hero moment, right? He decides, I'm not just going to rest. I'm not just going to say I'm over it. Well, that hero is a king of Wakanda. He's a prince. He's all the hero
Mm-hmm.
things. So I love that in They Clone Tyrone, all three of them are the same things, right? They're very aware of their neighborhood. They care about their neighborhood, right? They don't want these things to continue. Once they realize they're part of it, they try to really understand how that's happened. So they're heroes, right? Once
Mm-hmm.
they become aware of the kind of negative stuff going on, even once they become aware that they're a part of it, then they're like, well,
Mm-hmm.
what can we do? How can we support our community in getting this out of our community? It's the same
Which
thing Black
is
Panther does,
Yeah,
right?
and which is a significant part of the idea of the hero's journey. Although I'm going
Right.
to ask that we consider switching some language instead of and this goes back to Black Panther, with instead of the aspect of blaming them, let's talk about it from the place of accountability,
I like it.
because we
Thank you.
really, really need to start encouraging the idea that what's happening and the actions and consequences we're seeing are tied with accountability.
Thank
And
you. I agree with that.
there's a lot of ways where, and I think even some of the other subtexts in this is talking about accountability through punishment as opposed to accountability through love.
Like restorative justice.
That's another way to look at it, but it's that standpoint that accountability is also something fundamentally we're supposed to be teaching all of our
Yeah.
kids to
Yeah.
have, to make this world a better place. And we have so much about that
Yeah.
not holding accountability, which in some ways, when we get Keith Sutherland's character makes their
Mm,
appearance,
mm.
and he gives the sort of, here is the how the Star Wars wall crawl of how this all came to be, about, oh, the rich ones came in, they didn't like how the experiment going, and they up and left, leaving us here with this state of the US. And
Yes.
the accountability is, how do you actually got to fix the things that you broke? You've actually got to fix and address the things that you created, which part of, again, the bigger narrative that's going on, that our heroes become part of developing, is that they're realizing there is a conspiracy going on, which is perfectly set in the late 70s, 80s periods of movies and scare movies that came out with
Right.
the fears of like big government. The one that's popping to mind right now is the movie Barracuda, which was, I know, is a B-rated movie, but still, there's
Yeah.
issues there.
Yeah. And there was one that I'm thinking of that I actually recently watched over the pandemic. If I
Mm.
get the name wrong, it was Dustin Hoffman and Redford, all the King's Men or something like
Oh,
that,
yeah. Yeah,
right?
all the
About
Kingsmen.
Watergate.
Yep.
About
Yep.
Watergate. And so I agree. I think there's that element where there's like in this movie, there's that conspiracy space. And what I want to share with you is that I really appreciate you getting into language about like
Mm-hmm.
what was happening with Black Panther and then what even happens here in They Clone Tyrone, because I think that is an important space where representation is important as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you see African American and Black characters holding each other accountable as well as
Mm-hmm.
other identities and cultures as well, then we get out of this pointing the finger of who's right, who's wrong. Black Panther uses right versus wrong because we're dealing with heroes and villains. So there's a different level of mythology
especially
there.
with superheroes.
But I think what ends up happening is, yes, he's holding his ancestors accountable for the decisions they've made that have produced, a lot of stuff, not even just Killmonger, a lot of stuff. And I think that happens here as well. And they clone Tyrone, where when they get to what's really going on here, and then Kiefer Sutherland does give them that, that I love that the Star Wars crawl of it, we realize that there's a lot of accountability issues here. There's layers of accountability. Even at that level, he talks about someone who he is the boss. I mean, the employer
accountable to.
So there's even another, accountable to. So there's even another layer here that at that moment, as the audience and as the characters, they're like, well, how deep does this go? How far does this go? And then at that point, where does it end? And I think for me, without spoiling the ending, that's something that I appreciate this movie did too. It doesn't say we found the top of the accountability. Here it is. This is the top of it. We won. It says, well, we got to this layer. Now let's look at what they did here. And you're like, okay, right? There's so much more to discuss now.
As well as, without again giving out that spoiler, the source of it and the decision, which ideally came out of that intent of love, but how love got twisted.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yes. His love, right, for his family, the grief, even the grief, right, which I think when we look at Vision's quote from WandaVision, what is grief but love persevering, right? And so when you think about what that person's mission was, that grief, right? And as therapists, if we get into the therapist piece of it, how that grief is traumatic because it came from such a traumatic experience with the character and his sibling, and then that trauma leading into the grief that led into the ultimate decision, right? And I think as we look at that, I appreciate that story being told from a Black male perspective, that this Black male has that level of vulnerability, that level of depth, that all of that intertwined for him to make him decide, this is what I should do. I should do this, right? That's a level of humanity that I think we do need to see in Black and African-American characters, not just that they're archetypes, right? They're just the X or the Y or the Z, but that underneath that archetype, there's a lot of trauma and grief and healing that led to this, I've got to show up this way now in my neighborhood or in my, my community. And I love that gets told actually through each of them.
Oh, yes, definitely. And again, we're not giving out spoilers because we're not going to give away the end, just how much let's call it the big bad of this story, who in his both love and his grief basically took away other people's agency as well, which is also synonymous in the conspiracy that's at play and their goal in this storyline, which even when we have seen this in history, some people still don't accept what they want to do, or that idea that somehow they are like everybody else.
Yeah. And I think there's that idea of who are we trying to be, right? So we're moving from X to from A to Z, but what's that measuring tape? What are we doing here? And so I think this movie says, well, there's one type of grief here that when you find that you can't beat them, you got to join them, right? And so if you use that type of grief, I think that's something that should be explored. That for our big bad, it's this idea of, well, if you can't beat them, join them, right? Or if you can't fight back, infiltrate, right? And so I think if I can talk about it without giving away too much of it, I think Jordan Peele talked about it with Get Out in the second place, right? That oftentimes you end up just blending in to survive because that's all you can do. I think Cloned Tyrone gave us another version of that narrative, that we don't just blend in to survive, We blend in because after you kill us, after you silence us, after you lie and hurt us and throw us in jail, you learn if you just blend in, you'll be safer. If you just be quiet, you'll be safer.
Right. Which, when we're talking also with our clients, how often do we find that was the survival mechanism that was done as kids that stuck around into adulthood and is still causing them problems?
That, right.
And I think that
Yes.
that message is all not just in Get Out. I think it's also in Us and in its own way in Nope as well.
I agree with you. I think he definitely has that thread in his work that as Black people, as African American people, we tend to have to survive by blending in, right? And the horror of that, right? How scary that is to not know which version. Like if you look at us, I mean, there's a lot of issues with us, and I won't get too far, but I think they Cloned Tyrone and us have some similarities in that you get to see these other versions of yourself, right? And so in us, we're looking at this version of yourself that was maybe an experiment or didn't get to come out into the world, right? And so what do I look like as being in the world, and what do I look like as a detached experiment, right? And
well,
then
also,
you get
well, on those lines, I would also say is that aspect of it's also the message, because I'm now thinking about one of the original Star Trek episodes, in the standpoint of logic and figures versus emotion. And that's one of the things with us is, the thing with us is the characters we're following are representing all the logic and supposed emotion and battling essentially their emotional selves. And especially the unrestrained, some would say darker emotions that each of those characters, that movie represents.
Yeah. And I love that because I think that is something that's really blatant that you can see, right? That you have the characters that can talk and fight back, but you also have the characters that are emotional and they are fighting back. They might not have the words, they might just grunt, but they are also fighting for a space as well. Right. And so I love that because that is also what happens in They Clone Tyrone, that like these clones don't know that they're clones. They are waking up every day as themselves, thinking that this is who they are. Right. Until all three of them realize something's going on. That's that moment for them.
But remember, one of them is actually not a clone.
Ah, yes, I do remember.
Yep.
Yes.
So again, now the question, I think we've probably already just kind of give some clues away who are clones and who aren't. But that standpoint of, that the clones don't wake up knowing anything about who they are. When they do show up by the end of the movie, they're just wandering around, looking around. They're unable to speak, which is when we get the signature moment in the name of the movie. But they've essentially got to get programmed with all the quote unquote memories, speech, language as well. So there's definitely also this element about education too.
And programming, because if we go into a lot of what we learn about brain spotting is that that's what happens with trauma and our lived experiences, is that we get programmed to believe certain things and act in certain ways, right? And so when we do brain spotting, we're deprogramming, essentially. We're helping someone get out of those cycles, those narratives, those just replaying the same old stuff. Brain spotting allows them to kind of break out of that and see what's on the other side of that narrative, what's over here. I feel like that's what happened, what you're talking about in They Clone Tyrone, that as they wake up the clones, they put them in this, thing where they program them so they know whatever they're supposed to know, and then they put them right back into society, right? To do exactly as they're supposed to do.
And one of the continual themes we saw and examples of that is him startling awake after every time he's been replaced and trying to orient himself to where they are.
Yes. And so thinking about that, right, and holding that, and then I do want to kind of talk about who wasn't a clone, right? And so thinking about the Black girl, right, and how even in Kiefer Sutherland's discussion of how disposable she is and how like we don't even care, we don't even have to clone you, we just find somebody else, it'll just work, you just plug in another girl, it never matters. Same thing happens in Black Panther, where Killmonger's female friend is disposable, right?
Mm-hmm.
It happens, I feel like Lovecraft Country, right? That the young
Mm-hmm.
lady has a whole trajectory, a whole, journey that no one even knows that she's gone on. She literally is just kind of that discussion of the invisible Black girl or the
Mm-hmm.
disposable Black woman, right? And I think that's something that Yo-Yo's character really embodies, right? She's there, she's supportive, she has all the smarts, right? She
Mm-hmm.
has all the ability, but she's stuck kind of in this space, being this person, playing this character over and over again, but she's not cloned. She's just
Mm-hmm.
playing it. That's just like
Mm-hmm.
her thing that she's doing.
But even then, too, when we see that piece of her childhood bedroom, and we see all those Nancy Drew books,
And all the,
and
yeah, everything.
yeah, well, and her medals and everything that she has achieved, even in light of that, the response that I think was Jamie Foxx's character basically still tearing her down.
Yeah, yeah. Like, oh, you read all these and what's all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very, I'll say this, vulnerably, it was very beautiful for me to see a dark-skinned African American Black woman living this life, being represented this way, because that
Mm-hmm.
was me as a teenager. I lived with maybe not all the medals because I didn't try out for a lot of stuff, but I had all the Harry Potter books, and I
Mm-hmm.
was reading all of those things, and dreaming of a life outside of where I was. I grew up in South Central LA, and in the 90s and early 2000s, that was a hard time. It was a really difficult time for
Mm-hmm.
that part of town or that part of our world. And so watching Yo-Yo's character and having that be her narrative, where it's like, yeah, I have all these aspirations, these goals, I have all these talents. What's keeping me here? Right? Why don't I leave? And I think that goes into the narrative of kind of the strong the Black woman as the caretaker of her community, the Black woman being there to be the savior, whether she
Mm-hmm.
wants to or not. And I
Mm-hmm.
love that her character kind of just gets to be in that space. We don't discuss, is it right? Is it wrong? The characters continue to talk to her about it. But I love that as she gets to her crescendo in her character, she does realize who she is. She realizes that she projects a lot on the Jamie Foxx character. She realizes that she does want to be here and she does want to help her community. And that is why she's here, not because she's stuck, so to speak, but because she wants to be here, right? When they break everybody out, she's like, yeah, let's go to the next town. Let's try to help other people, right? And so if you
Mm-hmm.
think about it, even though the narrative oftentimes for the Black female character is that, oh, she's stuck. I love that discussion got to be that no, she's not stuck here. She has a lot of goals and a lot of skills and a lot of strength that she could also use in her community to help build her community up. And it's okay if that's her choice to do that. It's okay if she wants
Mm-hmm.
to use those abilities to lead and do other things, but it's also okay that I also want to use all that knowledge to support my community and help my community and build my community. And I just kind of love Yo-Yo's character arc that
Mm-hmm.
way.
And the same lines, I'd also point out there's also a commentary about intelligence in
Mm,
our community, but and she's the one who started actually paying attention to some of the pattern more so than the other two. And even though, yeah, she was reading the Nancy Drew books, which, yes, is usually about a little white girl who has so much more, who has certain social standards that are not holding her
yes,
back,
yes,
that sense of what does it mean for us to respect intelligence?
yes,
And
yes.
intelligence is not a negative thing. But again, it's part of, I think, going back into our messages about accountability.
I love that. I love that too. And that as she began to use what she knew in those books, it helped them
Mm-hmm.
to actually dig deeper, right? And I even loved her space of when it got past what she knew, right? So it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I'm at the level of we're past the Nancy Drew book, right? She was even able to show that vulnerability too of, okay, we are at this level of, I thought I knew what was going on, but we are past that. I love that
Mm-hmm.
too, because that's a level of intelligence we don't often highlight. The level of intelligence where we actually know our limit and we know that I know things up until this point. Now I'm open to uncertainty. Brain fire right
Mm-hmm.
now. I'm just like, okay, what's next? And so I love, again, going back to her character arc. I love that she got to portray or be representative of so many of these character tropes of the smart Black girl who thinks she knows everything. Well, she also got to a place where she didn't know something and was okay to be vulnerable enough to say, I don't. Or like you said, do we always respect intelligence? Well, we love people who know stuff, but are we good with people who can say, I don't know this? This is my limit here. I've gotten to the end of it of what I understand. And so I love that got shown too, like you said, on that level of intelligence, those different levels of how do we measure intelligence? How do we pay attention to it as well?
Very much so. And, I think that's a perfect place for us to take a break. So stay tuned for the second half of here as we TheraBlerd Out here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Mercedes Samudio, licensed social worker. We'll be back shortly, folks.
Voice America is on LinkedIn. Connect with us today.
Our lives and the world around us can get messy and frustrating. Untangle and Grow Counseling's focus is to untangle that mess and make sense of it so you have a good foundation to build and grow from. Visit us on the web at untangleandgrowcounseling.com. Perry Clark offers individual psychotherapy, couples and family therapy, and adolescence therapy from a variety of coping materials and resources. Visit untangleandgrowcounseling.com for more information.
Where can you listen to some of the world's top life coaches ready to dish out success tips and entrepreneurial guidance? The Voice America Empowerment Channel will do just that. Whether it's personal growth, building a better business, or inspirational life stories, make it a daily habit to tune into our programs. From weight loss and personal branding to law of attraction and increased happiness, you'll find it every day at voiceamericaempowerment.com. The Voice America Empowerment Channel. It's your world. Motivate, change, succeed.
Tune in to the Voice America Variety channel on the Voice America Talk Radio Network. Voice America Variety broadcasts a diverse array of topics, reaching a global community. Our experts come from all walks of life, and the topics they discuss are everything from current events, arts and entertainment, leadership, parenting, relationships, self-improvement, career advice, and a variety of other topics. Check us out today. You're sure to find something of interest. Voice America Variety. Talk on today's hot topics.
You are listening to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. If you have a question or comment about our podcast, send an email to pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. That's pclark@untyingknotspodcast.com. And now, back to the program.
Hello, all. Welcome back to Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I'm Perry Clark, licensed marriage and family therapist, here with Mercedes Samudio, licensed social worker, and we're having another of our TheraBlerding Out as we talk about the movie They Cloned Tyrone. So I know we've sort of been dancing a bit on this, and I know we're trying not to give spoilers because we do want you to actually go and watch this and see some of the commentary that's going there, not to mention just some of the scariness that comes up too in what we're seeing with the conspiracy, how that conspiracy is working, and the effects it's having on people's emotions and beings. So there's the scene in the beauty parlor, there's the scene in the church, there's a scene in the scenes in the underground labs, not to mention the restaurant as well.
Yes.
All of them are various expressions of how people are trying to deal with emotions as well, and how that also ties into trauma.
Yeah. And I think all of those spaces, again, also are stereotypical spaces of Black and African American people, right? And so you think about, okay, well, they're very spiritual. Well, like you said, this is an emotional space, a safe space, right? To show vulnerability, to show emotion, right? And so to think about the conspiracy using that safe space, right?
Which we see very much in there, where Greer's character is, in his sermon, is about obedience, which is a very different approach to wearing black sunglasses and seeing what's behind the billboard and They Live.
Yes, yes. And I appreciated that. I felt like that was very there was a lot of nods to that, even though we didn't have the visual effects. I think we had a lot of the audio
Audio.
effects, right? So you hear this in his sermon. When they go to the club, right? They have
Hmm.
different songs, right? That give you different feelings, right? If they want you to
Hmm.
move this way or do that way. Even the drink, right? When Jamie Foxx is
Hmm.
in the car, he finds that there's like drinks. And so this idea that there are ways to take things that feel safe, that feel familiar, that feel like this is part of our culture, and to exploit them. There's that.
Hmm.
But then there's also, like you said, these are ways that oftentimes African American and Black people congregate and do communal things. So we communally fellowship in church. We go to restaurants
Hmm.
and we eat together, right? We go out to clubs or to
Hmm.
bars and we connect and support each other, right? And so to have that conspiracy exploit those spaces, you kind of
Hmm.
start to think, what does that feel like to have that type of conspiracy happen to you? Not just like, oh, there's the man, but they're in your safe spaces.
Hmm. Well, even to what we saw in the beauty parlor, and there is the
Right.
movement for many Black spaces, whether it's the beauty parlor or the barber shop, to train them to be better at helping being emotionally supportive as well. And in the aspects, because I'm not going to tell you the scene, and I'm not going to say what actually happens in there because it also ties very well into education. But there is a very critical point where the woman there is expressing frustration and needs a voice to be heard as opposed to medicated.
Mm-hmm. Or silenced, even, right? And I think
Hmm.
that's something
But
that,
in some ways, they're one and the
yeah.
same.
Ooh.
In many ways, that they're one and one and the same. Just look at the issues we know with the issue of how over diagnosed we get with bipolar,
Mm-hmm.
as
Schizophrenia.
opposed to acknowledging the trauma somebody has been through, medicate it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
therefore silence it.
Yes, because now you're thinking about something else, you're doing something else. That reminds me of one of the scenes where they encounter something that makes them start to laugh. So even when they try to talk, they can't. It's uncontrolled. Everything's just funny. Everything's just a joke. Everything's just jovial. And I even appreciated that, right? Where it's like, yeah, these mechanisms in the restaurant, in the lab, to get African Americans, if you will, or Black people to think differently, to ignore their frustrations and their emotions, to maybe aspire to other
Mm-hmm.
ideals, like in the beauty parlor, what, the women are doing certain things, right? And it's like, yeah, so we're aspiring to this at the expense of our emotions, at the expense of our
Mm-hmm.
identity, at the expense of who we are. But then the
Mm-hmm.
other layer of that is, well, we have to survive. And so
Mm-hmm.
that piece of it, I think, is the depth of really exploring what racism looks like and what racism does. That even as we assimilate to survive, we're really not surviving. We're literally dying. We're killing off our identity, our culture, our language, right? Our emotions, right? And so I
Mm-hmm.
just really appreciate that, as layered as that discussion is, in these scenes at these safe spaces like churches, beauty parlors, restaurants, clubs, bars,
Mm-hmm.
we're able to see that, yeah, we can have a discussion on how maybe Black people assimilate too easily and too quickly. But then we can also see that in each of these moments, it was survival. In each of these moments, it was about, well, I have to survive this moment. Right. And so how
Mm-hmm.
can we end racism so that way we don't have to survive and we don't have to continue to assimilate? Becomes, for
Mm-hmm.
me, the narrative, or at least some of the message there.
Well, it's definitely one of the messages there, because there's
One of
also
them.
this, yeah, well, and as in any good movie, there's multiple messages.
Yeah.
But there's, even with this one, there's so many different levels of what we're dealing with, not just the conspiracy, the questions of identity that come up, what actually makes us who we are, which is one of those big ones when Tyrone's characters and also trying to get support. Because going back to that scene where they're laughing in the restaurant, Jamie Foxx's character is saying, I've never seen you laugh. Or even that standpoint of when they concoct the plan to to save Yo-Yo and stop all of this in the town. That's an aspect of where that relationship is working for them, and especially as between two Black men,
Yes.
And then even more how upended the relationship is with John Boyega's character's mother.
Oof.
Again, we're not going to give spoilers on that, but
No.
the mother, because that's also one
Yeah.
of the most significant characters in Black communities.
Yeah. Yeah. You just, I completely forgot about the mother character, but I do appreciate what you shared about the characters of John Boyega and Jamie Foxx, because they are two black men who, again, are portraying archetypes, very, very well known archetypes. But as they grow over and again, if you think about how they start, right? I won't give any spoilers. Their relationship does not start amicable at all. It starts off exactly as their archetypes would start their relationship off.
And the
then over the
programming they're
course of it,
expected.
and their programming they're expected to do, they all play their part, kind of like Westworld, right? Like it starts and they're like, okay, here we go, everybody's playing their part. But then as you get through the conspiracy, and they both realize how much they've been playing their parts in their community and with each other, that kind of takes that bond to another level. That I agree, by the time they are able to save Yo-Yo's character, it's a different bond, right? Even like you said, for him to realize, dude, I've known you my whole life, I've never seen you laugh, I've never seen you smile. Think about that depth of emotion, right, that they're able to have in that moment. That, again, I think we're talking about it more now, but Black men don't often get to share that in that dialogue. Many Black men might even say, I've been friends with someone for years and I've never seen you cry, or I've never seen you laugh, or I've never seen you even get angry, or I've never, thinking about that and how representative this relationship is of relationship healing. So they didn't start off as healthy, but as the course of them opening up, sharing more, going through this together, there's this bond where they get to a place of, let's help each other, let's support, let's get past whatever our programming says we're supposed to hate each other. Let's get past that, right?
Oh, and there's one other area that I think definitely should hit while we got time left in it. There's also a certain conversation here, which I know any of our mixed rates listeners would also appreciate, with certain characters we see in the movie. They're somewhat background characters, but these are also the stories too of what it means to be mixed race and sort of forced to pick a side.
Yeah, like who are you this, are you that, right? The Blackening has fun with that. I don't know if you've seen that one yet, but the Blackening has a whole
I saw the short skit that it was based off of, but as opposed to the movie, I haven't actually seen it.
Yeah, but it's that idea that even within Black spaces, sometimes you have to prove your Blackness, right? And I think that sometimes happens with multiracial people, because even if they kind of identify or show up darker or kind of more Black or African American, people still might question, well, how do you identify, right? Where do you stand? And I think that's something that can be really difficult for people because of what it means to stand in multiple identities, right? The privileges that you might get if you look a certain way or have certain spaces, the oppression that you also might experience in certain ways. I think this movie doesn't hit on it. Like I said, I think it's too much. All right, we need to thank Cloned Tyrone 2, 3, and 4. But I think they do definitely bring it in a little bit where, there's this idea of like, well, is someone Black just because they say so, right? Or are we going to make them prove it? Or are we going to make them tell us how they are? Right.
And because especially that first scene when they first discover the underground, and it's just like, God. And the guy's got great moves, I will point out that, when he's dancing. But then as you start looking at, the guy in the chicken place, the guy at the convenience store, it's like,
what do we think here? What are people thinking? I also think it becomes a discussion on who is controlling what. Who do we think is controlling what? Because those are just henchmen at lower levels. We know who the top person is. Right. And I think that was an interesting thing to say, like, okay, we all think this is who's doing it. But when you look to the top of it, again, not giving it away, there might be someone else who's actually pulling the strings and actually pressing the buttons. And I think that even goes down to the mother, right? Because if you realize how deep this conspiracy goes, the mother is a kind of almost a pacifier, right? No matter how many times he goes to knock on the door, I'm all right. I'm fine. Everything's good. Right. She kind of just becomes this. I want to keep going back to Westworld. This kind of, everyone just plays their part. Everyone just plays their part. Everyone shows up and they say A and then they say B. And for him, he doesn't even question it ever. He doesn't. Well, he does as he starts to have his emotion. Right. I love that. As his emotional awareness comes in, he starts to question his world a little bit more. But I love that for the most part of the movie, he doesn't question his mother's presence at all. It's just there as it is until he starts to have this emotional. Yeah.
And how absent he is. Because, the fact that he's been cloned, but it's like, okay, if that clone doesn't manage to die within a certain number of days, how is it that you've never dealt with her not being present other than a voice on the other side of the door?
Right. Just knock on the door. Yeah. And I appreciate, that's what I'm saying. I appreciate that journey for him. There's no emotional tie once he emotionally awakens, then he wants her to come out of the room, come out, say something other than what you've been saying. Right. And I actually appreciate that because as we think about TheraBlerding Out, look at what that looks like. He is supposed to be playing the archetype of the Black, hard drug dealer. And to watch him have this emotional awakening, even that one scene with the young man when he tells about SpongeBob and Patrick crying, right? And that's how this young boy has helped him to even see crying, right? That, SpongeBob and, Patrick are just crying and crying and crying. It was a really great emotional scene for him that then culminates in him being able to have this full emotional awakening of, where is my mom? Why is she just behind this door? Come out. Right? Can you just come out? He says it several times. Can you just come out? Can you just come out? Because he's having, like I said, that emotional awakening of, I want this. Before, I didn't think I needed it. Before, I was so detached from myself and my emotions. I didn't care. Now that I'm starting to care and worry and wonder, where are you? That conclusion, I think, is a really emotionally well done conclusion. And I actually think John Boyega does a really good job of holding that emotion to the climax, till you get to the climax of what that is.
Which I would also add is a very interesting commentary too on one of the classic issues that we always hear about is a Black woman can't raise a Black man. And yet, I would challenge that if we actually look at history and that aspect of the absence. Yeah, that narratives as well is like, no, there have been a lot of men here who are here stepping up because of the women, because of the mothers. And there's also the other flip side of this. There's a lot of men who have stepped away because of the mother.
I agree. And I think he holds that. And again, I really want to highlight for those who are thinking about watching it, this movie doesn't tell you what to think. It doesn't say this is the right answer or this is wrong or they shouldn't have done that. I really love that for representation because oftentimes I think when we see certain people always hold these stories and narratives, we see them as deep, introspective beings. And so now to see Black people have these really deep conversations about what does it mean to want my mom to show up? What does it mean to worry about what part I'm playing in my community? Right? Those questions that these characters begin to ask, I just love. And I love that it's being represented through Black people, right? Through people who we often just see as one-dimensional, stereotypical archetypes. They're like pulling back the veil and saying, no, what does it mean to be someone in this community who exists in this way? And I just really appreciated that.
Yeah. As well as how we handle and talk about grief and recognize just how grief influences the actions we take.
So much so. I agree.
Because equally, there's the saying, it's like, oh, you chose to join them. Well, what about turning them into us? What if it had been done the other way around?
Yeah, and fear, grief and fear, right? So that if someone does something to you that creates grief, but then you're scared, you never want that to happen again, right? So what does that do, right?
So some of the messages that are at play here. But we be wrapping up. So where can others find you and talk about the shame-proof parenting? And so they're not that mother on the other side of the door.
Yeah, so you can look for me pretty much everywhere. Start off with shameproofparenting.com. That's a great space to find me, but you can also Google me, right? Mercedes Samudio. I'm also on Instagram as Mrs. MRS. Samudio, my last name. And so anywhere you find me. I love blurting out. I love TheraBlerding Out. And so I love to talk to you. Follow me.
Yeah, I think I know I'm going to be titling these episodes from now on when we do this. All righty. So thank you for coming. And I'm sure we'll be out for as soon as we can get the next movie we want to go have a conversation about. Maybe even one that's in the past. So stay tuned for more here on Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. I hope you had fun with this one. And I know it wasn't as just geeking out as us being more therapists, because there's so many messages into this. But stay tuned. We'll have more for you coming. And be well, folks.
Thank you for tuning in for Untying Knots, Minds and Souls Untethered. Be sure to join your host, Perry Clark, for another episode on the podcast coming soon on the Voice America Empowerment Channel.